Great. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you all were able to make it. I know there's a little kerfuffle on 79th Street, caused some traffic, so happy everyone made it. Welcome to our November speaker series. Today, we have the pleasure to be hosting Ryan Rapoza from Tropical Audubon Society. He's going to be discussing light pollution in Miami, which is obviously an incredible issue that we're facing, particularly at Pelican Harbor. We see this all the time with window strikes, window collisions of not only warblers, we see peregrine falcons, we see all kinds of different raptors, songbirds. So very timely and important topic. So I'm glad you guys all took an hour out of your evening to come and hang out with us and learn a little bit. And I'm going to let Christopher here introduce a little bit more, and we're excited to get started.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks to everyone for coming tonight. Before the pandemic, we've been doing this for about 5 years. All kinds of great talks, from panthers to bald eagles to black bears, crocodiles to manta rays, you name it. And before the pandemic, we had great turnout all the time. And then the pandemic kind of ruined it all, right? And then we're doing hybrid forever. And so thank you for being one of our largest audiences in recent post-pandemic months. And we think the wine might have helped, and maybe the little owl Mowgli. But thanks for being here. I think you all know it's our 43rd anniversary. This is super quick. So it's our 43rd anniversary at Pelican Harbor, and we treated 42,000 patients. And we're so grateful for the support of the community for being open every day since 1980. So thank you for your support. We had a lot of our wonderful staff members here tonight, and some of them are in blue. You'll see them around, but they're awesome, and we love you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Also, Julie, Dan, Brady, like the best volunteers for years and years and years and years and years and years and years, and leading our cruise next week. Is it next week? This coming Friday, they're leading our cruise from Crandon Marina. We have cruises twice a month on the full moon or sunset in Crandon and Pelican. Wonderful opportunity for 2 hours on the bay at sunset, twilight, nightfall, birds, the lights. Oh, the lights can be better. We'll talk more about the lights and about how to have the right lights for our magic city. This man. So I've worked on this island for 21 years. With the Biscayne Bay Aquatic Preserve for 3 years, the DEP Coral Program for 9 years, and then Pelican Harbor for 9 years. And ever since I've moved to Miami in 2004, this man has been a mentor to me. He is one of the most respected ornithologists, biologists, birders in the South Florida community. you've written a couple of books. One book. He's been on the board of Audubon for almost 20 years, over 20 years?
22 years.
22 years. He leads trips around the world, Ecuador, he's back to Ecuador, Galapagos. He's a wealth of knowledge and an unsung hero for birds. So we love you, thank you, and welcome, Brian Rapoza.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, everyone. So I am Brian Rapoza. I am the field trip coordinator for Tropical Audubon Society. So my main responsibility with Tropical Audubon is to lead and also to arrange all of our birding field trips. So we have field trips throughout the year, local trips from September through May, and then international trips are a lot of times in the summer, but also could be in other parts of the year as well. But what I'm going to be talking about tonight is not about our field trips, but it's about an issue that has concerned me for well over a decade. And finally, in 2021, I was able to convince Tropical Audubon Society that this is an issue that we really need to get involved in. So the issue is light pollution. So I'm sure you're familiar with air pollution and water pollution and maybe noise pollution. Maybe some of you are even familiar with light pollution. So light pollution has a negative impact on birds. So I'm going to be talking about that. But to begin the presentation, if I can get this to work. Oh, here we go. First, I need to define what I mean by light pollution. For some reason, this is not working. Oh, here we go. Okay. Hopefully, I won't have problems with this all night. Here's my definition. You know, I just Googled light pollution, and I looked at some different definitions of light pollution. And this is the one that I thought was the simplest to understand. Light pollution is simply the presence of unwanted or inappropriate or excessive artificial lighting. So all plants and animals are used to natural lighting from the sun, but artificial lighting can be a problem for a lot of animals. So it can negatively impact all sorts of wildlife, not only birds, but we're going to be focusing on birds. I'm sure all of you have heard the expression, like a deer in the headlights. So deer literally can be negatively impacted by artificial lights if they're crossing a street and a car is coming and it's nighttime and it's blinded by the headlights of that car. It'll just freeze. It will not know what to do. And oftentimes that's how deer are killed by automobiles. You're probably familiar with the negative impact that artificial light has on hatching sea turtles. That when sea turtles hatch, they have to go into the ocean. But if there are artificial lights on the beach where they hatched, they will oftentimes start crawling toward the artificial light rather than toward the ocean, and they never make it to the ocean. So that can be a big problem. Bats can be negatively impacted by artificial light. So bats, of course, are a nocturnal animal that they don't hunt using eyesight, they hunt using sonar. And so if there's artificial light in places where they are hunting, they don't realize that it's actually nighttime. So it plays havoc with just their feeding schedule. Insects like fireflies can be negatively impacted by artificial light. It may impact their breeding schedule. Even zooplankton, the tiny little organisms that are living in the ocean, can be negatively impacted by artificial light. They will go up and down in the food column, up to the surface, and then sink below, and artificial lights can negatively impact that. So lots of wildlife can be impacted by artificial light, but in this presentation tonight, I'm going to be focusing on how artificial light negatively impacts birds. So how does light pollution negatively impact birds? Well, first you need to know that twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall, millions of songbirds are migrating over Miami. In the springtime, they're coming from their wintering grounds down south, and they're going to their nesting locations up north, and they have to pass through Miami. In the fall, those same birds will then return to their wintering grounds from their breeding grounds, and again have to fly over Miami to get there. Not only that, but the young birds that just hatched that summer have to make their first migration south to their wintering grounds. And they don't do it with their parents. They do it just by instinct. That, and I'll talk about what kind of ways in which birds, they navigate to get to where they need to go. But for first year birds that have never migrated before, they have to do it all by themselves. So it's amazing that they're able to get where they're going without ever having been there before. Christopher?
I promise my only interjection. Ryan is kind enough to audit all of our patient intakes by species for the birds. And he identified that 64% of our bird avian intakes are migratory birds. So that's a lot.
And I will have a slide that shows some of the data from Pelican Harbor that Anna shared with me. So I'll show you that data coming up. So all of these birds are flying either north or south, depending upon if it's spring or fall. And they do have generalized routes that they take when they're going from their nesting grounds to their wintering grounds, or their wintering grounds to their nesting grounds. And those routes are referred to as flyways. So in North America, there are 4 flyways: the Atlantic, the Mississippi, the Central, and the Pacific. So you can see that the colors are not very bright on this screen, but the blue is the Atlantic, the green is the Mississippi, the pink is the Central, and the yellow is the Pacific. So you can see that in South Florida, birds that are using the Atlantic flyway and birds that are using the Mississippi flyway are flying directly over Miami, predominantly in the spring and to a lesser extent in the fall. So what kind of birds are we talking about that are flying over Miami twice a year? Well, birds like Baltimore Orioles, or hooded warblers, or American redstarts, or summer tanagers, or painted buntings, or rose-breasted grosbeaks. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There are actually over 200 different bird species that are migrating twice a year over Miami. So all of these songbirds typically migrate at night. There are some birds like hawks that migrate during the day, but most songbirds migrate at night, and they do that for a couple of reasons. First, at night, the atmospheric conditions are more calm, there's less wind, and it's cooler, so it's just easier for the birds to migrate at night. Also, migrating at night avoids the hawks that are migrating during the day, because if the songbirds were migrating at the same time that the hawks were migrating, a lot of them would get eaten by the hawks. So most of these birds are migrating at night. So we refer to them as nocturnal migrants. The hawks that are migrating during the day, we refer to those as diurnal migrants. But most songbirds are nocturnal migrants. And they use a variety of navigational features to help them to get where they need to go. Since they're migrating, they're flying at night, they really can't use geographic navigational aids like coastlines or river systems or mountain ranges. That's what the hawks use and all of the other diurnal migrants. But the nocturnal migrants have to use other systems to help them to navigate, like magnetic fields and the stars to keep them on course. The problem is when these songbirds will fly over a very brightly lit city, such as Miami, they get disoriented by the bright lights. They can't see the stars. If you've ever tried to look at the stars in the middle of Miami, it's really hard to see the stars because the sky gets washed out by all of the artificial lights. Well, the birds have the same problem, that they can't see the stars, so they can't use the stars as a navigational aid. And oftentimes the bright lights of tall buildings will disorient the birds. So it's kind of like a moth attracted to a flame or just to a light bulb. They are just attracted to those bright lights and they could accidentally collide with the building. And what will happen oftentimes is the birds will just circle around the tall buildings at night, but then once it starts getting light when the sun is about to rise, they need to look for some place to rest and find some food to refuel so that they can continue their journey. So if they're seeing the reflections of vegetation in the windows of the buildings, they'll think that that is someplace that they can go and rest for a while, and they end up crashing into the window. And oftentimes the collision is fatal. So in some US cities, it's such a big problem with certain buildings that some nights, thousands of birds end up crashing into a building in a single night. You may have heard of a recent incident in Chicago just a few weeks ago where a certain building in Chicago that they knew was problematic for bird collisions. People went to that building the next morning and found about 1,000 dead birds. So you'll get situations like this where these are all dead birds, bird carcasses, birds that collided with windows that were just lined up just to show the immensity of the problem in some big cities. So it's a big city in Chicago, a big problem in Chicago, it's a big problem in New York, it's a big problem in Philadelphia. Lots of cities have a serious problem with light pollution causing large numbers of bird pollution. Here in Miami, well, first of all, before I get to Miami, what's the extent of the problem throughout the United States? There are some estimates that as many as 1 billion birds a year die due to collisions with windows. So at the minimum, it's hundreds of millions of birds every year that die as a result of window collisions. So this chart gives you kind of a breakdown of what birds are colliding with and how many birds are colliding with different man-made structures. So the biggest problem are tall buildings with lots of reflective windows. So the estimate for annual collisions there is 340 million collisions per year. Residences, including single-family residences, are the next biggest problem because there are many, many more single-family residences spread out, through the urban sprawl of most major cities than there are big buildings that are concentrated just in, say, the downtown area of large cities. So even with single-family residences, they estimate that the annual number of casualties is 253 million birds per year. Then there's power lines, that's mostly larger birds, herons, egrets, cranes, things like that collide with power lines, that's 22.8 million. Communications towers, 6.6 million, and wind turbines, 366,000. So add all those numbers together, and it's close to 1 billion birds per year. And you have to remember that we have 3 billion less birds, migrant birds, in North America today than we did 50 years ago. So 50 years ago, it was estimated that there were about 12 billion migratory birds in North America. Now it's down to about 9 billion. And one of the biggest reasons is window collisions. There are other reasons: habitat loss, pesticide use, feral cats, climate change. There's lots of reasons why bird numbers are declining across the board for migrant bird species. But this is one of the biggest reasons, is collisions with windows. So we know it's a big problem in most major cities in the United States, but it's still unclear how big of a problem it is in Miami. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get involved with this issue, is to get an answer to that question. How many birds are colliding with buildings in Miami? So we won't know for sure until we're able to collect enough data. And as you'll see in this presentation, it may take a long time to collect sufficient data, because we do have solutions to this problem. There are things that we can do to decrease the number of bird collisions. But in order to implement that, there's really 2 ways to do it. We can ask people nicely to do things to change their ways, to reduce artificial light, to reduce light pollution, and to make changes to their windows to make bird collisions less likely. So volunteering is one way to do it. Another way to do it is to pass some sort of ordinance or legislation. But as soon as you approach government officials and say, we'd like to pass an ordinance, the first question they always have is, I need to see the data. Show me that window collisions is a big problem in Miami. So that's why I realized that we need to collect data to show the government officials how big of a problem it is, to quantify the problem. So we can show them data and convince them that it's something that they need to address. Are we good?
We're good.
All right. So collecting bird data just doesn't tell us, how many birds are colliding. It tells us other things as well. It'll tell us what time of year, what time of day, what are the weather conditions where collisions are most likely to occur. It'll also give us an idea of the type of building lights that cause collisions and the types of windows that are most likely to cause collisions. It'll also give us an idea of, are some bird species more likely to collide with buildings than other bird species? And that's one of the questions that I think I've already answered. This is an ovenbird. An ovenbird is a kind of warbler. It's a warbler that spends most of its time on the ground, flipping over leaves, looking for insects to eat, and otherwise just walking on the ground like a little chicken. So it's only maybe about 5 inches long. It's a tiny bird. But as you'll see in the data that we've already collected, and the data I'm going to show you from when people bring bird collision victims here to Pelican Harbor, the ovenbird seems to be disproportionately more likely than any other species to collide with windows. And I'll give some hypotheses as to why that is. It probably has to do with the fact that this is a bird that spends most of its time close to the ground. So I think that most of the collisions are probably with windows on single-family residences rather than big high-rises, because this is a bird that doesn't really, when it's migrating, it's probably flying, up to a couple thousand feet. But when it's in the city, it's staying close to the ground. This is a northern parula. It's another warbler species, but the numbers of northern parulas that we've seen that have collided with buildings are much lower than that of ovenbirds. So there definitely is, there are some birds that are more likely to collide with buildings than others. All right, so what is one thing that can be done to educate people about this problem? Well, obviously I'm doing a presentation tonight, but we also have now a program. Tropical Audubon has a program called Lights Out Miami. So Lights Out started, it actually started in Toronto. I'll show you that in a minute. But National Audubon Society, which is the Audubon Society for all of the United States, they started their Lights Out initiative several decades ago. And there are now local Lights Out programs in 47 different cities in the United States, including Miami. There are only 2 Lights Out programs in Florida. One of them is in Jacksonville. You can see this map, and all of the red stars show you the 47 cities that have Lights Out program. So Jacksonville has a Lights Out program. They started their Lights Out program several years before we did, and now I'm collaborating with the folks with it's called Duval Audubon, because it's Duval County. So I have monthly Zoom meetings with the people in Duval County to just share information about what they're doing, what we're doing, so we can learn from each other. So only Jacksonville and Miami, those are the only Lights Out programs that are in Florida. You can see that most of the Lights Out programs are in the eastern half of the country, but there are a few in the western part of the country. So the first Audubon, local Audubon Lights Out program was in Chicago in 1999. And they modeled their program after a program that was created in Toronto, Canada in 1993 called the Fatal Light Awareness Program, or FLAP. So they created the first, they didn't call it Lights Out, they called it FLAP. And then Chicago wanted to create a similar program. So they work with National Audubon, and they came up with the title of Lights Out. So most of the programs in the 47 cities around the United States use Lights Out in their title. Now in 2020, National Audubon partnered with another organization, used to be called the International Dark Sky Association. They just changed their name to Dark Sky International. So they are an organization that focuses on simply the problem of light pollution. So I think they started by, it was people that were concerned that they couldn't see stars in cities, that they had to go, like for us here in Miami, if you want to see the stars, you have to go way out into the Everglades. So if the sky is going to be dark enough to be able to see the stars. So the people that formed this organization, they started off being concerned about just not being able to see the stars at night, but now they have grown into an organization that has realized that light pollution is a big problem for wildlife. So in 2020, they partnered with National Audubon to, just put your heads together to see how Audubon's experience with bird migration and International Dark Skies experience with trying to reduce light pollution. So now we're working together to try to solve the problem. One of the focuses of International Dark Sky Association, again, now called Dark Sky International, is focusing on street lights. So street lights cause light pollution as well, especially those lights, like in this picture, that are shining the light directly upwards. If street lights had a cover that only allowed the light to be focused downward, that would dramatically decrease the amount of light pollution in cities. So that's one of the things that International Dark Sky Association is trying to advocate for, to create ordinances or convince government officials to change their street lighting so that the light is focused down. Okay, a Lights Out program can have several components, and Tropical Audubon's Lights Out program it incorporates 3 of the components that I'm going to talk about now. The first one is to implement a bird collision monitoring program so that we can quantify the impact of light pollution on migrating birds. So that's sending people out to look for bird carcasses, birds that have collided with windows, so that we can have an idea of how many birds are colliding with windows, what time of year they're colliding, what time of day, which species, all of that. Okay? The second component that we've included in our Lights Out initiative is to encourage both building managers for big buildings and homeowners in single-family buildings to turn off unnecessary lights during spring and fall migration. And I'll talk about that a little later in the presentation. And finally, we're advocating for the use of products that reduce bird collision. So I'm going to talk about bird-safe windows. I'm going to talk about applications to windows that can decrease the reflectivity of the windows so birds are less likely to collide with them. So I'll talk about all of these things in turn. I'm going to focus first, and for most of the presentation, on the first component, which is quantifying the impact of light pollution on migrating birds. So 2 years ago in 2021, Tropical Audubon launched a collision monitoring program just here in Miami-Dade. So I've had people contact me and say, well, why aren't we doing it in Broward? I just decided that we had to draw the line somewhere in terms of what I could handle. So Tropical Audubon Society is the local Audubon chapter for Miami-Dade County. So our bird monitoring program is just going to be focused in Miami. I've had a couple of people, like I said, that have contacted me about Broward, and I'm encouraging them to start their own Lights Out program and their own bird collision monitoring program in Broward. And I would encourage every county in Florida to do that. So our monitoring can take place at any time of the year, but we really want to focus on the times when birds are migrating over Miami, because that's when there are millions of birds flying over Miami. At other times of the year, in the summer and the wintertime, it's just our resident birds that are here, and bird collisions, though they do happen, are much less likely. So we encourage monitors, if someone volunteers to be a bird collision monitor, to monitor in the spring, which is March 15th to May 15th is the peak of spring migration, and in the fall from August 15th to November 15th. So notice that spring migration is more concentrated than fall migration. Spring migration is really just a couple of months where most of the birds are migrating north to their breeding grounds. In fall migration, the peak can stretch out for 3 or more months, because not only in the spring, the birds are really controlled by their hormones. Their hormones are telling them it's time to breed. So they try to get up to their breeding ground as quickly as possible. In the fall, their hormones are no longer telling them it's time to breed. It's just their instinct is telling them it's time to go south for the winter. So Fall migration is much more protracted. And not only that, you're getting the first year young that are migrating for the first time. So that's why fall migration is longer than spring migration. The monitoring, while we'd love to have people just monitor around their house and report if birds are colliding with windows in their house, what we really need to find out is how many of the buildings, the tall buildings, especially those buildings that have large reflective windows, like downtown, like on Brickell, like in Coral Gables, Miami Beach. There's lots of places in the city that have buildings that look like this. So it's like giant mirrors. So as I said a little while ago, in the daytime, these windows act as mirrors, and in the taller parts of the building, it's reflecting the sky. So if a bird is flying around the building, it can't distinguish between the sky and the reflection of the sky. So it may crash into the windows up at the top of the building. But at the bottom of the building, the windows are reflecting if there's vegetation, trees, shrubs, things like that around the building. It's reflecting those trees and shrubs. So birds can't distinguish between the real trees and shrubs and the reflections of the trees and shrubs. So even at the bottom of the building, they're colliding with the windows. So these buildings are a problem, and we need to know really what the extent of the problem is. So we're encouraging people to go and check out these buildings. So what we want are people that live very close or even in buildings like this. For me, I live way out in West Kendall. For me to go downtown every day, fighting traffic, that kind of thing, it could be a situation where it takes me an hour and a half to get there, and I just picked the wrong day, and it's all for naught, that I didn't find anything. So what we're hoping for is to identify people that are willing to volunteer to do this, that live close to these buildings. So say if they're, and first thing in the morning, they're walking their dog. While they're walking their dog, they can look for bird carcasses. Just look on the ground and see if you can find anything. So that's what we're hoping for. Since songbirds migrate at night, we assume that most of the collisions take place either at night or early in the morning. So we tell volunteers that if you're going to be a bird collision monitor, you really have to go out as early as possible. The other problems are that if you wait until later in the day, the guys with the leaf blowers and with the brooms will sweep all the bird carcasses away. They'll hide the evidence. Or if there are feral cats, they'll come and they'll pick up the dead birds and they'll go off with it, and we'll never know that those birds collided with the building. So it needs to be done early in the morning. So there are some lights out programs, some bird collision monitoring programs where they collect the bird carcasses. In order to do that, first, you need a federal permit to collect the carcasses. Does Pelican Harbor have a permit? Mm-hmm. So Pelican Harbor has a permit. Tropical Audubon doesn't have a permit. We could get a permit, but we would have to go through that. Also, we would have to have some place to store all of the bird carcasses. And then we would have to have someone that would be willing to take the bird carcasses off our hands. So University of Miami used to have a bird collection, but they don't anymore. The closest place that I know of that accepts bird carcasses is the Museum of Natural History at the University of Florida in Gainesville. But that's a haul to go back and forth with bird carcasses. So I've decided that at least for now, we're not going to be collecting bird carcasses. Instead, what I have people do is just take out their phone and take a photo of the dead bird. And then if you want to put the bird in some place, so it's not visible, that's fine, but we're not collecting the carcasses. So this is a black and white warbler that collided with a window downtown Miami in 2021. So the person that found this bird he took a photo of the bird and he sent it to me. And I explained to him what I wanted it to do with that photo, and I'll explain to you in just a moment. Now, suppose you find a bird that is not dead, if it's injured. I also want you to photograph the bird, but I also want you to contact a rehabilitation center like Pelican Harbor to find out if you should bring that bird in so they can try to rehabilitate it. Okay? So the folks from Pelican Harbor at the end of the presentation may offer some additional information on what you should do if you find an injured bird that collided with a window. So I'll ask them to do that at the end. But this is a black-throated blue warbler. I like warblers, so I have lots of, and unfortunately warblers tend to collide with windows much more than other birds. So I have lots of photos of dead and injured warblers. So this was a black-throated blue warbler that someone found that was injured. I believe they took it to a rehabilitation center. They may have taken it here, but the bird survived, so it was okay. So if the bird is injured, you just don't want to take a photo and walk away. You want to make a call to Pelican Harbor, or there's a couple of other rehabilitation centers in Miami. There's rehabilitation centers in other counties as well that can tell you what to do with that injured bird. All right, how do you know? Remember I said that if I fought traffic it'd probably take me an hour and a half to get from my house to downtown, how would I know what was the right day to go? Well, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has created a website called Birdcast, and it gives, just like meteorologists can give a weather forecast, Birdcast can provide anyone who goes to that website with a bird forecast. They actually use the same Doppler radar that meteorologists use, and when birds are migrating in large numbers, the radar will actually pick that up. So they can predict when there's going to be large numbers of birds passing over any given area. So they've created a birdcast forecast. So if you go to the birdcast website, you can get a 3-day forecast for any place in the United States. You can see the particular migration activity in your county, the estimated number of birds that are migrating over that following night. And it'll even tell you what's the most likely birds that are going to be migrating on that particular day of the year. That's how much they know about bird migration. So in my instructions that I give to everyone who volunteers to assist with bird collision monitoring, I tell them use Birdcast as a tool so you're not going out on a day when migration is slow. That you want to go out on the days when it's most likely that birds are colliding with buildings. And unfortunately, it's probably going to take some sort of mass casualty event to get the kind of publicity that they had in Chicago and New York that led to ordinances being passed to turn the lights out in tall buildings during migration, to change the way in which new buildings are constructed with bird-safe windows. So that's kind of the irony of this program. I don't want any bird to collide with a window. I wish that birds would never collide with windows. But in order to solve this problem, unfortunately, it's probably going to take a mass casualty event in Miami to wake up people to the reality of what's happening in Miami. All right, so how do you become a bird collision monitoring volunteer? Well, first, you need to register, and you register on Tropical Audubon's website. At the end of the presentation, I'll show you the Lights Out Miami page on Tropical Audubon's website, and on that page, there's a big green button that says volunteer. So you press that button, I get, where you fill in your name, your contact information, I get that information, and then I contact you with instructions on what to do next. So we're using, remember I said that we're not collecting carcasses, so we have to have a way of collecting the information that all of the individual volunteers, all the photos and where they found the bird and things like that. So there is a database that has been created. It was created by New York City Audubon, and then it was improved by, I believe, Seattle Audubon. And it's called dBird. Now, how many of you have heard of eBird? eBird was created by Cornell Lab of Ornithology to report bird sightings, but they only accept sightings of live birds. You cannot report a dead bird to dBird. They don't allow them. So New York City Audubon created dBird, which is just for dead birds. Okay? So there's a link. It's the URL for dBird is simply dbird.org. Very simple. So there's a link to dBird on the Lights Out Miami page on Tropical Audubon's website. So anytime a volunteer encounters a bird carcass, they take a photograph, and then we ask them right there on the spot, using their phone, go to dBird and submit the data. So this is what dBird looks like. This is what the web page looks like. So it asks you for several pieces of information when you're submitting the data. First is the location where the bird was found. So you can submit that either using the address or by just zooming in on the map. There are a couple of ways to do that. Then there's a drop-down menu listing all of the bird species in North America, and you just scroll down until you find the bird whose carcass you found, and you click on that, and that goes into the database. Now, if you don't know what species of bird you just found, don't worry about it. There's a choice for unknown. And when I see it in the database, then I can look at the photo that is submitted, and if I can identify the bird, I have the ability to edit the submission and change it to the actual name of the species. But if you know the species, you can put that in. Sex and age of the bird, if known, hardly anyone figures that out. Though some birds are very distinctly sexually dimorphic, where the male looks very different than the female. So if you know the difference, if you know a male from a female, then you can put that. The age is a little more difficult. The date and time the bird was found. The status of the bird, whether it was dead or injured. And these are all drop-down menus. The cause of death or injury, if known. And I'll show you the categories for that later. A photograph of the bird, it's real easy to upload the photograph, even from your phone. And then, any other notes about the bird, any other things you want to put in there about the particular sighting, and then finally your name and email address. So once you click the submit button, I can view that, and then that goes into the database just for Miami-Dade. I can only view submissions from Miami-Dade. That's the arrangement that I've made with dBird. So I had to contact them, and they gave me permission to be able to access the data, but I only can access the data from Miami-Dade. That's why I can't do it for Broward or Monroe or any other county. So I'm able to view and even edit the data once it's submitted. So I have access to the administrative portal. Now, we also want to know how often the volunteers are going out to look for window collision victims. So I've created a form that I'm asking all the volunteers to fill out at least once a year. So this is what the form looks like. So I'm asking them for information. First, I need their name and address. I need the date, each day, the date of each day that they went out and surveyed, what time they started, what time they ended, total time they were out looking for birds, the location surveyed to be as specific as possible, downtown, Brickell, Miami Shores, whatever the area. It doesn't have to be a specific address, but just an area so I recognize, it could be University of Miami campus, that kind of thing. The distance covered in miles, so you can use your phone to see how many miles you walk. The number of bird carcasses, injured that you encountered, including if you didn't encounter any birds at all. It's very important to know if you went out and you didn't encounter any birds at all. If you're going to a building and you're never encountering any birds, we need to know that, because that must be a building that is not a problem for bird collisions. So even when you don't find any bird carcasses at all, that needs to go on this form. Okay, since the launch of the bird collision monitoring program, 32 people have volunteered to collect bird collision data in Miami-Dade. So most of these people, for the first few months, they were just emailing me, but now they have to volunteer by registering on the website, clicking that big green button. So we have 32 people that have volunteered, and to date, literally as of today, there have been 90 bird collision submissions that have been made to D-Bird in Miami-Dade. But here's the thing. Until recently, almost all of the bird collision submissions have been made by people other than the 32 people who have volunteered to collect the data. Those 32 people, I know that there's one woman who just registered a few weeks ago, and she lives on Key Biscayne. She's been walking around her building. She lives, I guess, in a condo complex. She's been walking around her building every day. She's finding bird carcasses. She doesn't know one bird from another, but that's okay. So she takes a photo of the bird. She submits it to D-Bird. I look at the photo. Some of the birds I've been able to identify. Some of them are so mangled that I can't figure out what it is, so it just stays as unknown. But almost all of the 90 bird collision submissions have been made by just random people who they found a dead bird, they wanted to do something about it. They may have found the Lights Out page on Tropical Audubon's website. They may have found D-Bird. I'm not sure in most cases how they figured out how to submit the data to D-Bird. But the majority of the people that have submitted data to D-Bird have been just random people. So what I've done is I've summarized the data that we've collected through D-Bird. And so in the left-hand column are the different causes. This is the drop-down menu in D-Bird. All the different reasons why a bird may have died, and you are submitting that sighting to D-Bird. So collisions with building or structures, vehicle collisions, cat attacks, entanglement, like in fishing line. That's a big thing that Pelican Harbor deals with. Fell out of a nest, unknown. In a lot of cases, you see there's a lot of submissions here. I think it was probably a window collision, but they didn't want to assume that, so they just chose unknown. And then other reasons like ingested rat poisoning or things like that. So of the 90 bird collision submissions, 56 had been collisions with buildings and structures. Of those 56 that were submitted, 47 were dead and 9 were injured. And hopefully the 9 injured birds, they call the rehabilitation center, and those birds survived. The unknown category is the next highest, but like I said, I have a feeling that a lot of those 29 unknowns were probably window collision victims. And then the others, people aren't reporting them for cat attacks or entanglement with fishing lines, though Pelican Harbor can tell you that they get birds that are entangled in fishing line all the time, but obviously there's not a connection with D-Bird there. And a lot of times those birds, they don't die as a result when someone finds them. They find them alive. Is that usually the case?
75%. I believe it's a 75% rate.
Yeah. So the survival rate is much higher with some of these other reasons than collisions with buildings. The majority of the 56 building collision submissions were birds found on the campus of the University of Miami. There's a lot of students and maybe even faculty members on UM that, they walk the campus every day, and especially during migration, they find dead birds. And young people, they just can't walk by and do nothing. So they've learned that there's something that they can do with the sighting that they made. So a lot of, there's one student in particular that has been submitting a lot from the UM campus. So I actually met him, Christopher, I met him at a meeting I had at Daria Feinstein's.
I was going to guess that was him. That's our guy.
Yeah,
he had the camera installed for the macaw nest.
I believe so, yeah. So he's submitting a lot of data. Okay? So that's where I'm getting data. Here's a breakdown by species. So again, look, ovenbird is number 1 with bird collision submitted in Miami-Dade to D-bird. Unknown, 7. 5 black and white warblers, 3 black-throated blue warblers, 2 each of yellow-billed cuckoo, common yellow-throat, palm warbler, and then 1 each of all those other species. The strangest one is American woodcock. That's a bird that we hardly ever see in South Florida, but they took a photo of it. It was definitely American woodcock, and it collided with a window. Have you ever had American woodcock here, Christopher?
Yes.
Just like 2 weeks ago.
Really? Okay, this one was from last year, I think. It was dead. That one was dead. So lots of species submitted, predominantly ovenbirds. Now, you know that Pelican Harbor they rehabilitate pelicans, seabirds, waterbirds. I didn't realize that until just recently that they also take window collision victims. So here's one of their window collision victims that has survived. This is a adult male Blackburnian warbler. I stole this photo from your website, I'm sorry. I'll give it back. I'm hoping this bird survived. You probably remember this bird, right? No? Come on. He looks pretty good here. So I'm hoping that bird made it. But this is one of the hundreds of bird collision victims where someone found the bird, not yet dead, and brought it into Pelican Harbor to see if it could be rehabilitated. So when Hannah asked me to do this presentation, I had been wondering if they collect data specifically on window collisions. So I asked Hannah if they collect the data, and I also asked her, if you do collect the data, can I have access to it? So I was very pleased that she agreed to share the data with me. So it was a spreadsheet, actually a couple of spreadsheets. So I can't show you the spreadsheets because it's too cumbersome. So what I did, I went through the spreadsheet and I summarized the data. And I found several interesting things, but one in particular. So they gave me data from 2015 to 2023. 2015 was just at the end of the year. 2023 was still in it. It was just the beginning of the year. So I decided to summarize the data from 2016 to 2022. So I show you here the total number of collision patients that were brought in each of those years, the number that unfortunately did not make it, either they died or they had to be euthanized because there was no way to save it. Unfortunately, that has to happen. And the number of birds that were transferred to another facility, probably birds of prey or larger birds that were sent to another facility to finish their rehabilitation, or the number of birds that were just released from here. So the really interesting thing that I found, first, you can see the total number of birds. It's several hundred birds that have been brought in the last few years. But the interesting thing that I saw look at the total number of collision patients in 2016 and the number that they were able to transfer or release. And then compare that to 2 years later, in 2018, the total number of collision patients and the total number that were transferred or released. A dramatic increase in saving these bird collision victims. So I'm assuming that there was a learning curve at the beginning where not much was known about how to treat these birds, but you quickly overcame that learning curve. Am I correct in that assumption? Can any of you add what's going on here with your amazing ability to now save so many of these bird collision victims?
Yeah, we definitely have improved our treatment protocol for head trauma patients, which most of the time is because of window and building collisions. Since over the years working more with our vets, we do a lot more oxygen therapy, laser therapy, different medications, fluid therapy, and it's just the learning curve, just really trying our best and trying different things and just seeing a lot of good success.
So for any of you that are donating to Pelican Harbor Seabird Station, this money is going into these amazing staff people here that are saving birds' lives. So if you have donated to Pelican Harbor Seabird Station, I thank you. If you need to make your annual donation this year, or if you've never donated, maybe tonight would be a good time to do that. Okay? So the money that's being donated, and remember that this organization relies totally on donations. So this facility would not exist without people that are supporting it. So please support Pelican Harbor Seabird Station because they're doing amazing work. So that was really unexpected. I didn't know what the data would look like, and when I summarized it and I saw the numbers, I just had to share it with all of you. So I also created, in this case, a top 10 list of the number of victims, and look who's number one again. Ovenbirds. So clearly, ovenbirds have a problem with reflective windows. So almost double the next one. Chuck Will's widow. Anyone know what a Chuck Will's widow is? It's a type of nightjar. It's a very strange bird. Probably led to the myth of the chupacabra in the Caribbean. It's a very weird bird, a big, giant mouth. It's an insect eater, it's nocturnal. So a lot of them, I guess, have collided with windows. And then lots of warblers, common yellowbill, black-throated blue. Yellow-billed cuckoos, not a warbler, but a migrant songbird. Northern Karula is a warbler, American redstart. Peregrine falcons. So the fastest flying bird in the world. So when it hits a window, it's probably 100% fatal. Black and white warbler, and then another bird of prey, Cooper's hawk. So those are the top 10 in terms of patients that have been submitted to Pelican Harbor. All right. I've already told you that most of the people who have volunteered are not the ones that have submitted data. So I've done several interviews in the last couple of years. This is the most recent interview I did with a reporter from Miami New Times. And when they contact me, the first question they always ask is, has there been a mass collision event? They want to, it's just like the evening news. Those kinds of stories are what make news. What, for some reason, people want to learn about that. So I always have to tell them, we haven't had a mass collision event, but we don't know. Well, we don't know if there's been a mass collision event. I can't tell them that we haven't had a mass collision event because I simply haven't been able to find enough people to go out, not only just once, but we want them to go out on a regular basis to check likely buildings that are causing window collisions and see what's going on. So Naomi Feinstein, the reporter with Miami New Times, she wrote a very nice article that really summarizes my frustrations with not being able to get people to volunteer. So if you'd like to volunteer, if you're able to do it, I'll give you specifics on how you can do that at the end of the presentation. We are doing other things to try to reduce the impacts of light pollution on migrating birds. Remember I said there were 3 components to the Lights Out program. There's the bird collision monitoring campaign, and there's also trying to encourage people to turn off their lights during the peaks of spring and fall migration. So according to the American Bird Conservancy, which is another really good conservation organization that is focusing on window collisions, that's one of the big things they do. They've estimated that 56% of fatal window collisions occur on high-rise commercial and residential buildings. So more than half. So that's why we think it's important to get people to monitor these buildings, to check them out. But we also think it's important to encourage the building managers or even tenants of the buildings to turn off their lights.
One super quick, we are at the hour mark.
Oh, okay, I'll go real quick. So, I don't know if they're going to be able to hear me with that going. Should be able to turn it off.
Don't forget to bring some wine and pour wine back there.
Okay, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage people to turn off their lights at night. So on our Lights Out Miami webpage, we have instructions for what we'd like people to do during spring and fall migration. So things like turn off exterior decorative lighting, extinguish spot and floodlights, substitute strobe lighting where possible, reduce lobby and atrium lighting where possible, turn off interior lighting, especially on the upper floors, and downshield exterior lighting or limit to ground level. Now, we're also encouraging single-family homeowners to turn off their lights. So we're encouraging them to join our Lights Out campaign by agreeing to a homeowner's pledge. So the homeowner's pledge, we're asking people during spring and fall migration to turn off any spotlights they have around their house and decorative lighting during the hours between 11 p.m. and sunrise. Excellent. We're also asking them to turn off interior lights when leaving a room, draw blinds or shades if indoor lighting is required after midnight, use downshielded lighting indoors, and where possible, put outdoor lighting on timers or motion sensors. So if you're already doing that, thank you very much. If not, you can go to our webpage and you can see all this information and you can click the button for the homeowner's pledge. So to date, there have been 67 Miami-Dade residents that have clicked on that button and have submitted the homeowner's pledge. So hopefully they're doing what they've pledged to do. All right, what about laws about decreasing light pollution? So there are 19 states, plus the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, that have laws in place to reduce light pollution. This map, which is kind of hard to see, the shaded states are the ones that have laws. Many of them focus on those down-shielded lights. Other laws require the use of low glare or low wattage lights. In Florida, there is an ordinance, but it's focused on protecting baby sea turtles. So it's Florida Statute 161.163, which provides requirements for buildings that are close to where sea turtles are nested. In 2021, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Bird Safe Buildings Act, which requires federal buildings to incorporate bird-safe building materials and design features, but unfortunately the Senate has not passed it. The House of Representatives has actually taken up this issue several times. They passed it in 2021, but the Senate won't take up the issue because the Senate is controlled by Republicans and just not into these kind of things. And then many municipalities, including New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, they've passed local ordinances requiring bird-safe windows on all new construction. But they have lots of data to support that window collisions are a big problem in their city. We need to get to that point by collecting more data. So what does bird-safe glass mean? Well, it simply means it's glass that's designed to be a physical obstacle to birds while remaining transparent enough for humans. So this is bird-safe glass. See all the little dots? So if the dots are spaced no more than 2 inches apart, the birds will not fly into the glass. They think it's a solid, like a solid wall. So it reduces the reflectivity of the glass. And there's lots of ways to manufacture bird-safe glass. There's fritting, whatever that is, silk screening, ultraviolet coatings. So again, to prevent bird collisions, the markings on the window must be spaced no more than 2 inches apart. They've tested this, the American Bird Conservancy has tested it. Anything more than 2 inches and it's not effective. Bird-safe glass is generally 5% more expensive than standard glass. So it's more of an investment, but it's only 5%. Last thing I want to talk about, there are several manufacturers that make transparent window applications with patterns visible to birds that can be applied to existing windows. So you don't have to buy bird-safe glass. You can apply a sticker with the dots on it to the windows that you already have. So there's a company called Feather Friendly. There's actually several companies that make these kinds of stickers, but Feather Friendly window applications have been shown by both National Audubon and American Bird Conservancy to be highly effective in preventing window collisions. So as a demonstration project, Feather Friendly decals have been applied to windows at our headquarters, the Doc Thomas House in South Miami. So Mark and Ileana Kramer are members of our board of directors, and they are Feather Friendly ambassadors. So they went to Doc Thomas House, and this is Ileana cleaning the windows. This is Mark cutting out the stickers, applying them, spreading them out, the whole process, and that's the finished product. And then there's a sticker on the bottom right of the window. When anyone visits and they see that, they can read what those little white dots are and how you can contact Feather Friendly to get this window application to apply it to your own windows. So if windows collisions are a problem at your own house and you want to try to do something about it, using these window applications is a really good way to go. So to finish, if you want more information, this is the URL for Tropical Audubon's Lights Out Miami webpage. So go there for more information. You can also go to National Audubon. They have their own web pages, lots of web pages for Lights Out. The American Bird Conservancy has lots and lots of information about window collisions. And then Feather Friendly, that's their website. So hopefully you're now more aware that window collisions are a big problem. Again, remember, 1 billion birds a year. So anything that you could do to help to reduce this problem would be greatly appreciated. Do we have time for any questions?
So super quick before we do questions. Thank you so much. That was incredible. I love your knowledge. This is the original bird nerd. Hello? The OG bird nerd. So before questions, because I know some of you might need to go, next week is Get Miami Day. So Monday through Thursday. So thank you for any gift of $25 or more counts as a vote. We want to be in the top 5 again of 1,100 nonprofits for most unique donations by the community. So thank you so much for that. And then also our presenter, our speaker next month is Troy. He's our local herpetologist, and he's really into snakes and herbs, and he'll be talking about snakes next month. Do you have any live snakes here, Troy?
Yes, he will.
So come on down for some slithering good fun with Pelican Harbor. If anyone needs to leave, we understand it's been an hour, but please, if you have questions, we have Brian's here for questions.
Yes.
When birds migrate, is it only one species and one that's one?
No,
They fly together?
there could be dozens of species flying at the same time. They don't necessarily fly in flocks. Even individuals of the same species will not necessarily fly in flocks. But they're flying somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 feet above the ground. And so, think of the birds flying over the entirety of Florida at a level between 2,000 and 4,000 feet. So there's lots of room for those millions of birds. There are some nights where they estimate that it's literally millions of birds just over Miami in just one night.
So why isn't that on TV?
Because you don't see them, because most of the birds, unless there's like a weather situation, like a storm that they run into, a strong headwinds, those birds will try to fly as far as they can to get as far as they can in one night. And then once the sun starts to come up, they'll look for a place to land, they'll rest, they'll refuel, and then they'll continue their journey. So most people have no idea that these millions of birds are flying over us during migration every night. There are some people that have learned to be able to recognize the flight calls of different birds. So if you go out at night and there's not a lot of ambient noise, honking horns and music and stuff like that, you can actually hear the birds flying overnight. They produce chips and other vocalizations that people not only can hear, but also can recognize what species is making that sound. Yeah. I can't do that.
Are you one of those people?
I am not one of those people. Any other questions?
How do they know lights on buildings are creating installations?
Because
And
they
it's
know.
counterintuitive. You light a building, you think the bird could avoid it, unless they
Right.
think birds, like insects, are attracted to light.
Let me give you an example. The World Trade Center in New York, the new one, they have these big spotlights. As soon as they turn on the spotlights during migration, within minutes, there are hundreds of birds that are circling within those lights. You turn off the lights, the birds disappear.
All right, so there's some decent
Absolutely.
data on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's lots and lots of data that show that birds are attracted to artificial light. Yep. Christopher?
One interjection and then one question. The interjection is in 2016 was the last year that, because we have such a compassionate, loving staff, the goal was to say anything and everything that came to this organization. And we received everything from tarantulas to coyotes to everything. And so in 2016, we realized that 42% of our patients were non-natives. So ducks, chickens, peacocks. And so when we had 2,500 patients, and we had a very small staff and a very small budget, and we realized quality over quantity and focused your limited resources on native species that have much higher biological value. And so in 2016, we had very few staff and we had 2,500 patients and 42% of them were non-natives. So once we eliminated the non-natives and focused on the natives, our release rates soared and the birds soared, right? And so it was very, very good. I guess the one question I have for you is, like if I was the director of National Audubon, which I would love to be one day.
No, you can't leave.
Or maybe Florida Audubon. I love all the former directors, Peter Fisher and all of them. But I would have lobbyists working at the state or national level to force change for these native species that are migrating through our state, to require the municipalities and the counties to have building ordinances to fix this on a larger scale. And,
Well, Audubon, Florida is getting involved. There are staff people from Audubon, Florida that join the monthly Zoom meeting that I have with Duval Audubon. So last month, there were a couple of people from Audubon, Florida. So they definitely want to get involved in this issue. And absolutely, we're going to need their assistance because they're the experts in advocating, at the state level. So yeah, we definitely got to need their help.
Awesome. And if Pelican Harbor wants to help and start to use some of these resources, promote them in our newsletter and our website, with our community, so we want to say as many words as we can to do the right thing by birds and by our wildlife, right?
Absolutely. We have a big Miami Shores community. I mean, the Miami Shores community is
I
very
didn't read-
engaged in conservation and caring a lot about that sort of thing. I mean, to share with them, they even have their own network that might be wise to share.
Especially these municipalities that are basically bird sanctuaries. I think that's a good low-hanging fruit. Question one here.
Okay, that New Times article, when did that come out?
November 2nd.
Oh, okay.
So it just came out last week.
Okay, so I guess my next would have been, to make it good help, but I guess that was only a week.
I've gotten one person to volunteer since the article came out, but I've also been contacted by someone that's trying to put me in contact with New York City Audubon to try to learn what things they did to become successful. So the article did have some positive impacts already.
Okay.
Does the new Seaver Sanctuary building have bird-safe windows?
The one where it's permanent got kind of value engineered out, but we are going to be applying the film once it's built. So yes.
Value engineered means it's too expensive.
The type of glass that has it baked in, but we will be applying it.
Yeah, it's much cheaper to put the applications than to buy the glass. Go ahead.
Does the national level have any sort of conference or anything with Audubon to help with communication between different chapters?
They actually have a lot of resources. If you go to our Lights Out page, I put lots and lots of links to National Audubon pages where they discuss various aspects of the problem. So, I have a little information about an aspect of a problem and then a link to go to National Audubon to get lots and lots of information about that aspect of the problem.
I mean, for people like you to connect with other groups so that you're all communicating.
It's limited. What I did was I went to the websites of the local chapters that have initiated local Lights Out programs and tried to figure out what are the best practices. So that's how I learned about D-Bird. I had never heard of D-Bird until I started looking at these different websites, and I found that several of the Lights Out programs were using D-Bird, and I knew that collecting the carcasses would be difficult. So when I found D-Bird, I said that's the answer to that problem.
So you mentioned that, I believe you said like later at night and especially early morning is the best time so how early? Like what's the best time?
I can only say the earlier the better, because again, you have to beat the leaf blowers and the street sweepers and the feral cats, because they'll take away all the evidence. So I see those guys out, when the sun comes up. So that's why I want to try to recruit people that live in the buildings that may be problems. So they can just walk out their door, the door of their building, just walk around their building. If I can get enough people that will be just walking around one problematic building, we can get a lot more data. But that's the problem. There was someone that contacted me. She lives in Broward, and I'm not going to ask her to come all the way from Broward. So she's the one that I'm trying to encourage to start a program in Broward. So we're not being effective in getting the word out to really what the target audience should be, and that's people that live in or near the problematic buildings. Yes.
So presumably the most problematic buildings are the ones that have the highest percentage of glass on the exterior.
Yes, reflective glass.
But is there sort of any other identifying characteristic that, taller, it's bigger, is there any profile?
I think the reflective glass is probably the biggest indicator. Yes. This is only the second time that I've done this particular talk. I have done Lights Out as part of a Dark Sky International Zoom presentation. International Dark Skies Week is in April, so I've been asked to do presentations on Lights Out in April, but they've been on Zoom. This is the first one actually that I've done live and in person. Right. Thank you.
My question has to do with the fact that, well, the lights out concept is certainly a very humanitarian concept. My concern is, will the electric companies, what strategy can be used to convince the power industry in this country, who are responsible for profits, and that want lights being turned on rather than lights being turned on?
Right. It's going to be hard to convince FPL to get on board with this, because the building owners will actually save money by turning off the lights during migration. Yeah.
Office building owners.
Exactly. So we're not going to target the power companies. We're going to target the building managers of the apartment buildings, the office buildings that may be causing these collisions. That's what they're doing in New York.
Are there currently any initiatives either in place or in consideration with respect to how to go about convincing the consumers of lighting to do this?
Well, as I said in the presentation, there are two ways that the Lights Out programs have been doing this. One is to have people volunteer to do it, and the other is to convince government officials to pass a Lights Out ordinance that requires lights to be turned on.
Do you think that there is any reasonable possibility for state legislators?
It can even be done at the state level, but
the champion
absolutely, that would be great. But currently, everything seems to be happening at the local level. So, New York City Audubon is convinced New York City government to pass a Lights Out ordinance. So it wasn't passed at the state level, it was only passed at the city level. And that's been the case everywhere